This video was brought to you by Imprint. The Tories aren't very popular with young people. For a variety of reasons, including an unresolved housing crisis and a decade of stagnant wage growth, young people are now less likely than ever to vote Conservative, with the latest YouGov polling suggesting that just 4% of 18 to 24-year-olds would vote Conservative if a general election was held tomorrow. While the Tories are optimistic that Sunak might reverse this trend, his recent announcement that the UK will be rowing back on some of its net zero commitments, clearly intended to drive a political wedge between Labour and the Tories, will only make young people even less keen on the Conservatives than they already were. So in this video, we're going to take a look at why young people don't vote Conservative, why Sunak has made things worse, and why, even if it might make short-term electoral sense, the death of the young Tory is an existential risk for the Conservative Party. Before we start, if you want more information and analysis from TLDR, then we just announced our 28-page newspaper that summarizes all of 2023. There's a link to the announcement video and the store in the description, and pre-orders close on October 1st. So the first thing to say is that the Tories have never been all that popular with young people. Historically, your median UK voter begins their electoral existence far more likely to vote Labour and then gets more Conservative as they get older, and switches to the Conservatives at about 55 years of age. Now, a complete explanation of this trend would require another video entirely. But some obvious reasons include the fact that old people tend to be richer than young people, and therefore are more likely to vote for an economically right-wing party to better preserve their wealth. But also because old people tend to have more conservative attitudes to social issues as well. In theory, this should be good news for the Conservatives. After all, thanks to rising life expectancy and the UK's relatively low fertility rate, the UK's population is expected to get significantly older in the coming decades. For context, the UK's median age has already increased from about 35 in the 90s to about 40 today, and is expected to be 45 by 2040. According to ONS data, between 2016 and 2039, the vast majority of the UK's population growth will be accounted for by a 50% increase in the number of over 65s, while the working age population will essentially remain flat. If the UK is getting older then, and old people vote Conservative, then this should, in theory, give the Conservatives an electoral advantage. However, worryingly for the Tories, recent data suggests that younger generations are no longer getting more conservative as they age. As we explained in a previous video, millennials are actually getting more left-wing as they get older. According to analysis by the Financial Times, when they entered the electorate, millennials were basically as left-wing as their predecessors were, with the share of millennials voting Tory about 5% below the national average. However, unlike previous generations, millennials are moving left, and the share of millennials voting Tory is now about 20% below the national average. Now, this trend long predates Sunak and can be partially attributed to long-standing structural issues in the UK, especially the UK's housing crisis, which has denied many millennials access to the property ladder and made housing one of millennials' top political priorities. In fact, if you look at voting patterns in general elections, it looks like young people really fell out with the Conservatives all the way back in the 2015 general election between David Cameron and Ed Miliband, when a stark and ever-widening generational divide appeared between the Conservative and Labour voters. Now, there was actually some hope in Conservative circles that Sunak might be the man to reverse this trend, given that when he came to power, Sunak was significantly more popular than his party was among young people. For context, despite the fact that only about 20% of young people intended to vote Conservative in the next election, roughly 35% of Gen Z and 45% of millennials had a favourable view of Sunak when he came to power. Unfortunately for Sunak, though, he hasn't been as successful in turning young people into Tories as some hoped, with the Conservatives continuing to lose favour among young voters. The latest YouGov polling from mid-September, for example, suggests that just 4% of Gen Z voters and 9% of millennials would vote Conservative if a general election was held tomorrow. And worse still, that polling showed that over 65s are the only age group with whom Tories enjoy a polling lead. What makes this particularly remarkable is that something quite different is happening in Europe, where, at least in some European countries, young people are actually getting more right-wing. Now, this has been happening because Sunak has been unable to get control over his party, which means that even though he might be more popular with young people than other Conservatives, they still don't want to vote for a Tory. But also because Sunak has pursued certain policies which are particularly unpopular with young people. Sunak has raised taxes on working people, taking the UK's tax burden to a 40-year high, while simultaneously protecting the pension triple lock, which essentially guarantees that the state pension will increase by the highest of either the average earnings, consumer inflation, or 2.5%. Now, as average earnings came in at 8.5% this year, that means that state pensions will probably rise by 8.5% in April. Now, while it's worth saying that the UK does have one of the least generous state pensions in the OECD, the triple lock is perceived as massively unfair by many young people because it guarantees that pensioners are protected from all economic headwinds and actually get a bit wealthier every year, while working people have their living standards squeezed by inflation. And Sunak's recent announcement on net zero isn't going to help issues either. While Sunak argued in his speech that he's still committed to all previous targets and that the UK would still be on track to meet its climate goals, he definitely gave a net zero skeptic vibe. And young people are, for obvious reasons, super keen on net zero. According to the latest YouGov polling, for example, 18 to 24-year-olds are about 50% more likely than the average Brit to cite the environment as one of the top issues facing the country. You get the idea then. By using net zero as a wedge issue to differentiate the Conservatives from Labour, Sunak is probably going to make the Conservatives even less popular with young people, exacerbating Britain's intergenerational political divide. To be fair to Sunak, in a way, this sort of makes short-term political sense, because young people are sort of a sunk cost for the Conservatives. The Tories have a very bad rep with younger voters. So, with an election looming, it makes electoral sense to just give up on them and focus on consolidating their appeal with older voters. Nonetheless, there's something undeniably a bit toxic about a political system with such stark demographic divides, and it could be a risky long-term strategy, as the Conservatives might find it difficult to win over future generations like Millennials and Gen-Z if they never even considered voting Tory in their youth. If you're interested in this kind of thing, you might enjoy Imprint's visual guide to the 48 Rules of Power, a book that's been described as an amoral, ruthless, and instructive guide for those interested in understanding and gaining power. But that's not the only thing you can learn. Just like TLDR, Imprint is all about helping you learn quickly, conveniently, and visually. It's super quick because most of their lessons take less than 2 minutes to complete, summarizing knowledge from all kinds of topics and using Harvard professors and best-selling authors to teach you key concepts. It's convenient because it's all housed in their easy-to-use mobile app, letting you replace doom scrolling with actual learning. And it's visual because, well, look at it. Their animated explanations help you stay focused, understand concepts quickly, and actually retain what you learn. So, join the millions of users learning with Imprint, including me. I'm taking their multi-day flow course right now. And do that by using the link in the description. Plus, if you use that link, you'll get a 7-day free trial and get 20% off an annual plan when you sign up. And they'll know that you came from us. So check out Imprint, support our new sponsor, and thanks for watching TLDR.